Okay, today we are going to be talking about Chapter 7. But before we talk about Chapter 7, we're going to be talking a little bit about stuff that shows up before that in Chapter 6. Specifically, a handful of lines recited by Caconia towards the end.
King Midas hunted in the woods, in search of Silenus, the wisest satyr, the companion of the wine god. "What is the best and most enticing thing for a man?" the king asked. The satyr laughed in response. "Children of mischance and misery, you are asking for an answer you wish not to hear. And what is best is beyond your reach. To never be born, to never exist, to be nothing. But you still have the next best thing. Die. And do it soon."
These lines are paraphrased from an ancient Greek text, Eudemus, by Aristotle, in which the philosopher describes the so-called wisdom of Silenus. This wisdom amounting to the idea that in existing, man experiences infinitely more suffering than he would have if he had just never been born at all. Silenus says that it is better to never participate in life, never participate in the excellence of nature if it means avoiding such a cruel and unnecessary fate. So, I guess at the very least it's thematic to the game. Now, on its face, the message that Silenus imparts, as well as the outlook for the chapter itself, is undeniably pessimistic, right? And this idea is seemingly solidified when it becomes clear that several of the themes within chapter 7 are inspired by the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche. In fact, the name of the chapter itself, Vereinsamt, is shared with one of Nietzsche's poems. However, in The Birth of Tragedy, where Nietzsche actually discusses the story of Silenus, he refutes this negative notion. Despite his notoriety as an infamous pessimist, Nietzsche's first book is surprisingly optimistic at times. The Birth of Tragedy lays a lot of the foundation for the themes that Vereinsamt borrows from, primarily that while suffering in itself has no, intrinsic meaning, it is in surviving, in bearing that suffering and persisting, that we as humans become empowered. He addresses Silenus in the book and found within the Greek tragedy a wisdom that superseded the satyr's pessimism, that the suffering on the stage allowed the watcher to affirm the joy of living, finding worth in the act itself. And the key to this wisdom was to be found within an opposing dichotomy that, at least to Nietzsche, was intrinsic, not just to tragedy, but to creative endeavors as a whole and even to human nature: the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Now, where Nietzsche described the Apollonian as the rational, the logical, harmony, clarity, the individual, in a word, the orderly, he described the Dionysian as the polar opposite, the chaotic, the impassioned, emotion, revelry, the dissolution of boundaries. And it's important to note that neither of these two facets was paramount to the other. Rather, they arose as a result of a deficiency in its opposite. The Dionysian rises when the logic and reason of the Apollonians fail, and by contrast, the Apollonian prevails when the uninhibited Dionysian cannot hold sway over man, in a sense a transition from one state to another. And we see this transition in many aspects of chapter 7, right? Within Laplace, we have a literal robot, a being whose every action is dictated by reason and logic, ceding her position to those who are more swayed by emotion, a quality that comes to the forefront and causes conflict several times throughout the chapter. Within Vienna, a so-called city of arts and progress, one that claims to be the home of rationalism and sagacity, the people succumb to the storm, in which the syndrome causes them to fall back on their most base and violent desires. Caconia falls from a logical, optimistic person to one who is consumed by the disorder and failings of the world and of herself, to the point that she even fails to value her own life. Even Manus has their own transition, a transfer of power from the old to the new, from the cold and calculating arcana to those beneath her, those who were conscripted primarily through their grievances and their hatred towards the world and others. The ultimate theme of chapter 7 is a passing of the torch, right? The retirement of the old guard and the rise of a new generation. There are transitions everywhere. But the place that we see it most, and the place where the bulk of the story focuses, is Apeiron. And not just with the final feast of Aperon, which pays, direct tribute to the bacchanals of the satyrs, but within each of our significant characters on the island. They all harbor aspects of these two prototypes that Nietzsche describes, though certain qualities definitely shine through more than others. Now, 37 is obvious, right? She is the Apollonian. She embodies basically all aspects of this concept. The emphasis on individuality, the concern for orderliness, it is her entire character, right? And while she is more closely associated in the story with Hermes, she still has several motifs and design choices pertaining to, light and radiance, which would be considered closer to Apollo's domain. And I mean, both gods were considered to be quite close to each other in the Grecian mythos to begin with. Additionally, another role of the Apollonian is that of the dreaming self, of illusion, something which 37 has, thematically many associations with in the story. She was our guide through the illusions when we first stepped foot in the cave. She was the one to undergo Aperon's trial. Apollo is the god of prophecy, among many other things, and the patron deity of the Delphic oracle. 37, after besting the trial, communes with what she calls the deity of Aperon. She dreams, and within that dreams, she comes to understand some fragment of the truth. On the other hand, 210 is more indicative of the Dionysian, even visually, down to the grapes in his hair and his love for wine. In terms of personality, he adhered to the tenets of the Aperon belief, but he was also shown to let his emotions get the better of him, right? In 6's character story, he grows incensed when Atticus treats Alma dismissively. He becomes angry when he believes Atticus isn't taking his duties seriously. He approaches the pulpit and he speaks, not out of an earnest desire to impart knowledge, but for the purpose of verbally jousting with his opponents. His role as the rhetorician runs contrary to logic. His words are intended to sway and to persuade, to twist words and to usurp the established conventions of rationality, not to provide any factual basis or understanding. It is an appeal to emotion and to feeling, and it is something he freely recognizes, right? In fact, he seems to derive enjoyment from it. And eventually, he falls down the path of the Dionysian. He is the one who rises when the Apollonian falls, right? When the truth fails, sophistry prevails. He brings about this surrender to decadence and to revelry, not just by convincing everybody to go party in the storm, but by coercing 6 into revealing the truth of the island in the first place. He is the instigator. Just as 37 is the archetypical Apollonian, 210 becomes the archetypical Dionysian. And nothing really shows this more than the final feast of Aperon itself. The song that is played, Hymnus ad Bacchum, is a song of reverence to the god of wine. It evokes a sense of intoxication and revelry. It is a surrender, the final embracing of chaos and even madness in a world that has ceased to abide by the truths that the Aperonites had so dearly held to for all of this time. And then we get to 6. Now, normally I would have said that 6 was a stand-in for the Apollonian, but I figured that was too obvious and also not entirely correct. He has all of the qualities and, the visual motifs for sure. However, I think he represents a little bit more than that. Rather, I think he is the intersection of these aspects, or as his number would imply, a perfect person. Though in this case, perfect not in the sense that he is without flaw, but in the sense that he perfectly embodies the archetype of the human condition, right? From 1 to 10, each number has its moral purpose and mission. Among them, only 6 was chosen to be leader, because 6 stands for balance. A balance between, these two clashing aspects. Obviously, he portrays the qualities of the Apollonian man, right? Again, harmony, logic, rationality, all of that is very, very apparent in his character at first glance. But he also contains very Dionysian qualities, which are a bit hidden at first, but become revealed as more of his backstory is given to us. And to Nietzsche, this mixture, right, this interplay of these two warring aspects was integral to the Greek tragedy and to humanity as a whole. The protagonist, the Apollonian, the one who stands for harmony and order, tries to find some semblance of sense in a chaotic and unjust Dionysian fate. And he references Oedipus specifically as a prime example of this idea. The key point being that this is a tragedy. It always ends with the protagonist left unfulfilled. Oedipus, knowing that he is fated to marry his mother and kill his father, resolves to never return to Corinth, not knowing that it's not actually his true home, right? With his own 2 hands, he unknowingly carries out this prophecy himself. It is the quintessential Greek tragedy. and 6 refers to himself as the Oedipal figure within his own story. One who knows his fate, rails against it, does everything he can to prevent it, but in the end he is unable to stop it. And then, after his fate comes to fruition, right? After the revelation descends, after he has obtained clarity and knowledge and has become the ultimate Apollonian ideal, he then develops the aspect of the Dionysian. The revelation brought with it nihilism. It brought knowledge of the falseness of the truth that they all revered, knowledge of the island's inevitable doom. And in the face of that, 6 freezes. He chooses to say nothing. As Nietzsche puts it, the Dionysian man knows that his actions cannot affect the ultimate balance of things, and, disgusted or disillusioned by this, he just opts to do nothing at all. Even his ending, where he retreats into the cave, draws parallels to Oedipus. The great king, now left bereft of everything he once had, is blinded and despondent, seeking exile for his transgressions. Thematically, this can almost be seen as a regression for 6, right? A fall from grace. This entire time he has known everything. He knew how Apollonian would end. He knew what would happen if everyone were to learn the truth, and he knew that this outcome was in the end inevitable. From the very beginning, he was burdened with near omniscience, but he could do nothing about it. Now, the ending he foresaw has come to pass, and he is just as ignorant of the future as anyone else. He makes the choice to remain ignorant. Faced with this crossroads, he opts to part ways with 37 to return to the cave. He rejects knowledge and chooses to remain where his perception of the world is dictated by shadows upon the wall. He has chosen to remain wise, uninvolved, and to look on. In a sense, it's the ultimate parting. The one who chose to remain ephemeral and the one who chose to be born. And I do mean born, because this parting scene can also be taken as 37's birthday, in a sense. Apiron is isolated, not just in the sense that it's an island, but also in its status as a storm-safe site. Going by the logic of the storm that we have, this island never properly existed within the world at large, right? Within the historic record. In a way, it's sort of a womb for all of these nascent ideas, the numbers, right? These people on this island outside of time were permitted to develop and pursue matters of absolute truth without having to be sullied by the harshness and dirtiness of the phenomenal world. And, foremost among them was 37. As Sophia said, she was the one who was closest to the truth. But here, at the end of this chapter, 37 calls out, not to 6, but to Atticus. A name that she doesn't use because it is a relic of the physical world. There is no reason to use it when the number 6 encompasses the very essence of the man. But by choosing to use his given name, she is choosing to step into the material, right? Choosing to recognize the legitimacy of physical constraint and choosing to be born as a proper denizen of the phenomenal world. It is, you could say, her worldly birthday. And I mean, it should have been her actual birthday as well. You see, 37's listed birthday is July 27th. In the story, World War I is starting right as the storm hits, and in the true history, that should have been July 28th, 1914. Now, because of madness and the early critical point, it doesn't actually line up that way, and the storm takes place in January instead. But thematically, I don't think it's a coincidence. Her biological birthday in the true timeline and her worldly birthday after the storm are both associated with times of war and unrest, right? Of a transition from a world of peace, if tenuous, to one of strife and uncertainty. And again, we have this idea of transitions, right? Of the old guard, represented by 6, fading into the background while the new generation, 37, emerges into the world. And by choosing to emerge into the phenomenal world, 37 commits that gravest transgression that Silenus had cautioned against. To not be born is best of all. And here, just as Nietzsche refutes it in his work, as he found that light that had been veiled behind the pessimism, so too does 37. She begins her own transition into a Dionysian state, her own metamorphosis from a denizen of dreams and unreality to the tangible, physical coldness of the world proper. In 6's own words, she has chosen to be practical, involved, and suffer, and thus she becomes the newest and possibly the last legacy of Apollonian. The Grecian tragedy has finally come to its end. And so too has this video. You like that segue? I thought it was good. I've been wanting to figure out less abrupt transitions for a while now, and there you go. This video was a little bit difficult. I decided I wanted to read through the Birth of Tragedy, because I figured I'd get like a better understanding of the work if I did. No, absolutely not. I basically just retained nothing and had to go through Wikipedia and Cliff's Notes to complete this fucking script. It was kind of a pain. I'm basically illiterate, especially when it comes to really dense, flowery, philosophical texts, so there you go. Now, you might notice that I neglected to really mention Sophie at all, and while I had plans to do so, I think I'd rather make a video specifically for her, because there are some things regarding like her character, her references and all that I'd really like to include, but they don't necessarily fall within the scope of this one's theme, so probably gonna do a video on her at some point, probably not the next one. I already have the next one kind of figured out on what I want to do, but I will do another one on her at some point. But yeah, that'll be it. I would like to thank Ayn Rand, Paul Ryan, and Mikoyan for being patrons and supporting these ramblings, so, you know, thank you. Thank you. And for everybody else, I do hope this was interesting to you. I may not be great at philosophy, but I do find it fascinating, and I hope like some of that kind of bled into the video and got you interested or whatever. But thank you, and I will see you on the next one. All right, bye bye.